When Leith Van Onselen joins us, the Chief Economist at the MB Fund at MB Super, and of course, one of the dynamic duo behind macrobusiness.com.au. Mr. Van Onselen is on the line. How are you, Leith?
Good, thanks, Luke. How about yourself?
Just fine, my friend, just fine. Lots to talk about today, including the rejection by Australians of Big Australia. I wonder if the message is slowly getting through. I mean, people are living this, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely, mate. If you live in a big city, you're living it firsthand, especially if you're trying to get a rental home. The Australian Population Research Institute, which conducts an annual survey into sort of voter attitudes on immigration and a whole bunch of other measures, they released their latest survey, which was conducted in December last year, of 3,000 voters, a representative sample. And surprise, surprise, it showed that 74% of Australians want lower immigration, with 49% wanting much lower or zero net overseas migration.
Jeez.
And only 14% support current levels based on that survey. So the usual story, mate. And you'll never guess what their greatest concern was. It was housing. They're 71% are concerned that adding more people is going to push up the cost of housing. And the same number, or the same share, 71% also believe that Australia does not need more people. So This is just yet another survey showing that the elites that run the country, the policymakers, big business, the universities, etc., who keep pushing this down our throat, are out of step with the Australian people. We don't want such high immigration. We don't want our cities to be as crowded as they are. We don't want a, population forced rental crisis. We don't want infrastructure to never keep up. We don't want shortages of schools and, hospitals and never-ending congestion and having to live in shoebox apartments.
Yeah.
Australians don't want this, but the politicians and their cronies keep pushing it down our throat. The same old story, mate.
And can we just say to people, look, you might raise the issue, and someone might say, that's racist to talk about that. It's not. It's actually a conversation about the mathematics of life. How many people can you fit in a place, and not deprive others of the quality to which they've become of life they've become accustomed, and to which they've made a contribution, because taxes pay for all the stuff that we rely upon. So you're entitled to have a view, and it's not about the colour of anyone's skin. It's about what we have in our local communities in numbers, and how that affects the life that that we largely pay for. Speak up about this, and other areas of the media who are just mute on this. I don't know if you're scared about having the conversation, but for goodness sake, have the conversation.
Can I just add a point to that, Luke,
Please
if you don't mind? Look, just in the 60 years after the Second World War, Australia's net overseas migration averaged 90,000 people per year, right? So we had 90,000 net overseas migration a year for about 60 years post the Second World War, and it oscillated around that range very narrowly. Like some years it was like 130, and then other years it was like 50, but it averaged 90,000. Then in 2005, the federal government decided to ramp it. So we more than doubled it, and then it averaged 220,000 for the 15 years leading up to the pandemic, which we all lived through that. That was too much. The cities didn't cope. And then now, it's been ramped up even further. In the last year, we've had nearly 550,000, so 549,000 net overseas migration. And even with the, Albo supposedly halving it, he's going to halve it back to 250. Which is still way above the 90,000 we had for 60 years. Now, my view is we should get back to closer to that 90,000, which worked fine. So it's not about being anti-immigration. It's about having a number that's sustainable and that we can cope with. And we cope with it just fine for 60 years. And then the federal government decided to open the floodgates, and then now it's opened floodgates even wider. And that's why we've got a problem.
Well said. Now, I'm about to speak to the people at Domain, but they reported that Australian rents surged higher in the March quarter amid record low vacancy rates. And again, this is an issue you and I talk about weekly here, one that won't be solved anytime soon unless all of a sudden you're able to find a way to create 100,000 new dwellings in a couple of weeks. So if you just reduce immigration just for a while, hello, but for people renting a third of us, mate, it's a disaster, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So it's just a classic case of too much population demand, not enough supply. So, Domain released their March quarter rental report, I should say, and the combined capital city house rents surged by 5% in the March quarter, which is the largest quarterly increase in 17 years and the second highest on record. And for those who want a unit, Unit rents also rose for a record 11th straight quarter by 3.3% over the March quarter. So, you know, it's the same problem. Too much population demand, not enough supplies, pushed the rental vacancy rates to an all-time low, and it's just driving rents through the roof. And we've had this, 38%, I think it was, according to PropTrack, which is another data provider, since the pandemic surge in rents across the nation. So, this is why we've got a rental crisis. There's no other reason. I mean, there are problems around housing supply, which I think we'll get to in a second, but the principal reason is that we're just importing way too many renters into the country, which is putting strain on the rental market and driving rents through the roof, and then forcing people into group housing and homelessness and financial stress. It's as simple as that. It's mathematics.
Yeah. So when you look at the ABS data, only 43,100 homes completed in Australia over the December quarter. In trend terms, hang on, we've got a government that wants to build, 1.2 or something million over 5 years. If we build at that level, mate, that target's just been missed big time.
Yeah,
We'll call it now, can't we?
Absolutely. So you're right. So 43,100 homes were completed in Australia in the December quarter. Now, according to Albo's housing target, we need to build 60,000 homes per quarter. So it's way below that. But what's even worse is that the ABS also released data on dwelling commencements. So that was dwellings completed. Dwelling commencements was even weaker. So there were only 37,200 homes commenced in the December quarter. So they obviously lag completion. So you got to commence them before you can complete them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the worst quarterly result since 2012. And based on that run rate, so if you times it by 4 to get like an annualized figure, that gives an annual run rate of 148,800, which is 91,000 below the Albanese government's construction target of 240,000 homes a year. So that is just, ridiculously low levels. And just to give some local perspective around that, New South Wales only commenced 10,700 homes in the December quarter, which that gives you an annual run rate of 43,000, which is only one home per 4.3 new residents based on New South Wales's latest population growth. So, it's just not enough, mate. It's simple as that. And, and we talked last week of the dwelling approvals data. That was basically exactly the same. That was also 149,000, if you annualize it, dwelling approvals in February. So, we completed not enough homes, and the commencements and approvals are even lower than that. So all that tells you is that housing supply is going to keep falling at the same time as we're running this huge population growth. And all it just means is there's going to be more misery for Australia's renters. And also prices are going to keep rising as well. So it's just, housing supply is headed in the wrong direction. That's why Australia's got and we've got, obviously record population growth. And that's why Australia's got an unprecedented rental crisis. And, really the Albanese government's decision to ram open the immigration floodgates into a supply-constrained market when you've got high interest rates, high building costs, builders competing for labour against infrastructure projects and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And builders going broke left, right and centre. It was pure policy idiocy by the federal government. Yeah. And that's why Australians are in rental stress. That's why they share housing and homelessness. Simple as that, mate.
So a third of us rent. I reckon 100% of us know someone who rents. And the government knew of this. They knew there was a skill shortage, and that impacted the building sector. Yet the gates were thrust open. Much of the people that walked through the gates were international students. They don't live all the time at universities. They need to find a place to call home. And the government did all of that, knowing all of that. And if you are one of the third of the people that rent, or 100% that knows someone that rents, you should be hopping bloody mad, shouldn't you, Leith?
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, yes, this population boom's been driven by international students, and obviously they're not builders, right? So they're basically adding to housing demand directly without any boost of supply. And this whole notion, I heard, I think it was Shane Wright in the SMH was trying to argue that students live in student accommodation. That is complete garbage.
Yes.
Data came out this week that showed that 80% of them live in the private rental market.
Mm.
So, if we've got 720,000 international students in the country now, according to the latest Home Affairs data. That's about 100,000 more than the peak we had pre-pandemic. So that's just helped to ram up, housing demand. And that's, part of the reason, not the only reason, that we've got a rental crisis. And then obviously we've had a big rebound everywhere else as well. So, this is just pure numbers game, mate. There's nothing about it. And, the supply of housing is going to be constrained for several years, I imagine, because of these, construction costs have gone up literally 40% since the pandemic. They're not coming down. And that means it's more expensive than ever to build a house, which means that less people will be wanting to build a house because they can't afford it. And also builders can't turn a profit.
Yeah.
And then they're competing for labour against infrastructure projects, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we're going to have a supply constrained market for, a fair period of time, I imagine. At the same time, the federal government's running a huge population policy, and it's not rocket science here. None of this is.
No.
It just means that we're going to have this perpetual housing shortage until they cut immigration back to a sensible, sustainable level, which is below the nation's capacity to build homes and infrastructure. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, the situation is going to keep getting worse.
Yeah. Macrobusiness.com.au. Check it out every day. I do. Thank you, Leith. Have a good weekend, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Speak to you next time.
Yeah, speak to you next week. Leith.